Hello everyone, and of course, welcome back to another Mortal Kombat 1 video. Today, no less being my full-on spoiler review for Mortal Kombat 1's story. So to celebrate its global release, I thought that today would be the perfect opportunity to sit down and talk about all things spoiler related to the story. Now, it should be needless to say, but spoilers ahead. If you're interested in exploring the story or going in completely blind, this is basically the point of no return. Thus, I do strongly recommend you either run away now, or better yet, watch my spoiler-free review if you want to have a general idea of my thoughts on the story without going into too much detail about what I liked and what I didn't like. And even for those that haven't watched that, I still do recommend it, as it could easily be seen as a part 1 to this video, as many of my points and ideas kind of bleed over from it. Also, sorry that this is coming out a little later than I had expected. From what you probably can tell of the runtime, this took me a lot longer to put together than I expected. So this is your last warning now. 3, 2, 1, I fucking knew it! Alright, for those of you who don't know, during the initial reveal of Mortal Kombat 1, one of the big theories I had going into it was that the Shang Tsung we saw here was in fact the same one from the Aftermath timeline, as we do know that the multiverse kind of does exist from Mortal Kombat 11. So I always kind of knew that this idea was possible, but it was just all a matter of whether or not they'd pull the trigger on it, as subsequent future trailers of it kind of deterred me from that idea, which is completely understandable as this was the story's main big twist. So, a hole in one for me, I guess. But with that said, what are my actual thoughts on the story? Well, let's actually go through it chapter by chapter and discuss my pros and my cons with each section, because I fundamentally do believe that this is the best way to break down the story. Now, the opening of the story itself is very good and very strong. It really does a lot to help set and establish the new era, and just how vast the changes Liu has made to this new timeline, as the ever charismatic and dangerous Shang Tsung is quite literally left as a snake oil salesman. Fucking genius, mind you. That is, until he is approached by a mysterious figure designed to upset the balance of this new world and era. It creates a very interesting yet foreboding future of what could happen here. Now, this is where the chapter really begins, introducing us to the likes of Raiden and Lao. And here, it acts as a call of adventure to the two, as we have Kung Lao eager to prove himself and create a legacy, whilst Raiden himself is rather hesitant to leave home and become something more. The chemistry between the two feels great, as it very much looks to be like a brother's bond. So the way they bounce off each other throughout the story is definitely a highlight, as it's both playful and entertaining, with Lao of course thinking very highly of himself. Now, the entire tea house section is just amazing. Madame Bo getting body slammed, the introduction of the Lin Kuei, and the sown seeds for Lao's hat will never not get a laugh out of me. It's all just simply fantastic. And I do love how it was all actually a test. You see, one of the innate flaws of the chapter system was involuntary making characters look weak, due to the story taking priority. But the fact that this is all a test serves as a measuring stick for how our characters can grow, while simultaneously protecting the Lin Kuei. It's quite well done in that sense. It also helps that we come to learn of the story's main plot via Liu Kang with a very traditional Mortal Kombat tournament. So overall, very strong start to the story, but only leads to a much stronger chapter. And I love this one so much. Johnny's chapter is just fucking amazing. The fact that it starts with him on set and then smoothly transitions to his origin story is just brilliant, as this is a side of Johnny we've never actually seen before. We learned so much of him prior to the tournament, but we never actually get to see it ourselves. So this was a pleasant treat for us. It really brings forth that Hollywood aspect of his character. I love that behind all the fame and the glamour and the money is someone who's so incredibly desperate to cling to that fame, feeling compelled that he can only retain his Hollywood elite status by spending his wealth recklessly. It makes that separation between the two that much more understandable, and Johnny feels very human in that sense, that he can't help but be part of this destructive cycle of success. Also, extra brownie points by having the balls to call him by his real name. But that's how you know the depth of his relationship with his wife. The appearance of Kenshi is also fantastic, as it does in turn kind of sow a bit of a rivalry that begins to flourish a little bit later on. Also, Liu Kang ringing the doorbell is just the most Liu Kang thing ever. I love that even with nigh omnipotent benevolent power, Liu still chooses to remain very down to earth. Now, the fight between Scorpion and Sub-Zero is a pretty damn good fight. It's a bit of needless conflict, mind you, but when you get someone as arrogant and as self-absorbed as Cage, sometimes a punch in the mouth isn't always that bad of an answer. Now here we get the Raiden chapter, and it is a wonderful one, blending aspects of the fish out of water story with that of a rising prodigy. Thus, we get a bit of a training sequence for him, allowing him to prove his worth to not only his comrades, but his brother-in-arms Lao. I love the payoff and look of disbelief on Lao's face as he sees his friend grow. It's really nice to see him be humbled once in a while, as arrogant Lao does have a tendency to rub me the wrong way from time to time. As for the medallion part, I definitely popped off when I recognized it, but I think its existence raises a lot more questions than answers to me, as there is the mention of elder gods, and considering the direction the story does take, it's a little bit iffy to me that they are name dropped, and then just suddenly absent again. But elder gods be what elder gods do, and that's doing nothing at all, I guess. I will say, I do like how this allows Raiden to get his powers, as it does feel earned, but I definitely maybe would have preferred him to actually have unlocked this in his training. In saying that though, the entire amulet storyline could actually be a lie, as we don't see Liu utilize his lightning abilities anymore, so maybe he put it into the medallion, so he could then give it to Raiden, which in my mind makes a lot more sense. Now the Outworld section here is great. It's a perfect blend of the tournament sequence, interlaced with that of political intrigue and drama, and how its people are divided, with those that remain loyal to Empress Sindel, and those that see a prosperous future with General Shao. I do really like how early they sew this in, as you just know that at any point in time, that band-aid can get torn off. It also serves as a great introduction to these Outworld characters. Li Mei is the devoted, yet scorned member of Sundo's police force. Reiko is this die-hard zealot and believer of Shao's vision. Shao himself is a ruthless patriot of Outworld's people, and Sindel is this warm, yet extremely harsh figure, fighting to keep her world from being torn apart. As for Kitana and Mileena, their characters are left rather bare for this chapter, and really, the rest of the game. It's one of my biggest gripes with it too, because whilst we definitely feel some sympathy for Mileena's situation, and Kitana having to play mediator, I don't think there was enough time between the sisters to really explore and flourish that relationship, considering just how different it is in this timeline. I was also very surprised that Kitana didn't get her own chapter in this game. Now the tournament section itself goes as you would have expected, with Raiden reigning supreme, and I'm really glad he was thrust into this position, as he shows a lot of humility and naivety in his approach to combat. But with that said, what follows is where I would say the story really begins. This is where the game feels like more of a sequel to that of 11, as the appearance of Geras allows us to understand that whilst time may have been restarted, the scope of the hourglass is ever present, and it's here where we learn the tampering of the timeline via Shang Tsung and the Stranger, creating a very interesting investigative chapter, which is spearheaded by Kenshi. Also, for those of you who don't know, this is actually the first time Kenshi's ever had a chapter in a Mortal Kombat game, as he was DLC in 9, and played an extremely minor role in Mortal Kombat X. He's never really had his opportunity to shine, so it's really nice to see him kind of get his own moments here. And I must say, I absolutely adore this chapter. It introduces us to the slums of Outworld, and the bits of it that Sindel tries to hide. It's here where we're introduced to the slithery Shang Tsung, who is masterfully voice acted by Alan Lee, and Baraka, the leader of the inflicted Tarkar's horde. And this entire segment, 10 out of 10, because it gets you to sympathize with Baraka, and that whilst he's a disformed monster, he still retains a heart, holding what is left of his family and his people close to him. This is a great overall alteration to the character, and in my opinion, the very best Baraka has ever been. Now here we easily get my favorite reference of the entire game, with Johnny's reference to that of Alien 2. It's so good and it's so on point, and it's so in line with his character.
Get away from her, you bitch. Excuse me?
It's also the first reference in the entire game where I went, ha! Fuck 'em old. But it's so well done and perfectly timed. So props to NetherRealm for that. I genuinely could not stop laughing. Now from here, we battle the likes of Rain, Tanya, and then Mileena, who we come to learn Shang is trying to cure, not poison. And then it leads to Kenshi getting his eyes poked out, and sweet Christ, this is so much worse than the first time he lost his sight. Like, okay, he lost it to some souls, right? But there's no actual physical damage. I think maybe at worst, that's like a really bad chemical burn. But instead, Mileena went jab. Like, I had a feeling that they were going to do it, but I thought it'd be more like a slash across the eyes, not full-on ice picking the poor man. So all in all, this chapter is just stellar. We get to see Mileena's infliction in action, Shang's position in Outworld, and Kenshi's new origin story. Also, ominous foreshadowing in the background here. If you look at the stage for Shang Tsung's laboratory, you can in fact see the Pyramid of Argus, which would of course be used much later on. So yeah, that's a pretty cool little sneaky thing that I did see quite a while back, but didn't really think much of it. Now, this then leads to a character they've purposely been hiding throughout the trailers, Quan Chi. And I gotta say, I do like his origins here, as it's arguably just as pitiful as Shang's, as he was confined to the mines, so he was graced by the Stranger's touch. So I like how the cogs begin to turn here, as the plot begins to unravel thread by thread. And it's really here where the stakes get heightened, as we have a very new modern take on the Deadly Alliance. From here, the remaining heroes are taken to Shang's flesh pits to be experimented on. And for the first time in the series ever, Baraka is given his own chapter, and it's pretty damn good. I will say from a gameplay perspective, it is kind of weak, as he's only forced to battle flesh pit creatures, but it does at least make sense for the scene here. Plus, I do like the idea of exploring the horrors of Shang Tsung's flesh pits. That stuff's pretty cool. And it's here where we are introduced to yet another character, Sizoff, aka Reptile. Now, as happy as I am to see him return, this character's personality is just emo sad boy. And I get it, we're supposed to sympathize with the character and his situation, but he really lays it on thick here. It just kind of becomes a bit of a pity party for him whenever he's asked about himself. So I wasn't too fond with how he was written in that way. I get it's to explore his character's origins, but with how quickly he shakes off his family's death, I don't know, I feel like it could have been handled a bit better. Even so, I am thankful that he was given a chapter and we were able to learn about him, albeit not to that of my own personal taste. It is how it is. As we close out the chapter, we then get to meet Ashura, and this is just another really solid chapter, as it serves as a great way to meet the opposition with the likes of Nitara, Havok, Darius, and Serena. It also helps us understand just what exactly Quan and Shang are up to. So the Soul Harvesters basically work as a way to revive an unstoppable army, which later leads to the creation of another character. We'll get to him in a second. Now, there's a bunch of great moments here, but easily the highlight for me was Johnny finally handing over Sento to Kenshi. It was so nice seeing him thank Kenshi for saving his life, and then seeing that rivalry actually blossom into a real friendship, as Kenshi makes it kind of aware that he does know of Cage's filmography. It's a real feel-good moment that definitely lands. And talking about the character I mentioned earlier, we get the revival of Ermac in the modern era. And dude, he is so goddamn cool here. Once he's unleashed, he's a damn juggernaut. And you know what? I'm glad. Because really, on paper, Ermac should be like nigh unstoppable. And I'm so glad that for the most part, he basically is. Because in prior games, he's largely overlooked, because the plot takes priority for his loss. But here, the reason why he loses feels very much so justified, as it leads us to seeing Sento and Kenshi in action. And dude, it's so good to see that sentient blade in action. I don't think we've ever seen it fight on its own free will. And once plunged into Ermac, it works as the perfect countermeasure to kind of break the grip and snare that Quan has on that being, as it does temporarily gain its own free will in the form of Jared. An idea and plotline that has been around since Mortal Kombat 9 that just was never tapped into. So I'm glad that this idea does come to light here. Next, we do have the reptile chapter, and I will say, I definitely had a lot of fun with this one. I wouldn't say it is quite as strong as the last few, as it's designed to be more of a distraction escort mission, but it does give Syzoth the opportunity to shine and show that he isn't inept. There's also some really fun like slapstick humor in here, but I did definitely enjoy. It's a bit much, mind you, but I think you can definitely enjoy this chapter. But it's in the aftermath where we begin to learn more that the stranger is a mysterious figure of the previous timeline, someone that Liu Kang could have never foreseen. Now on paper, this is extremely interesting to me, because if we're looking outside the boundaries of what's the obvious picks, we have a variety of choices to pick from. So I definitely liked how this was all set up. And what follows from this point is easily by far my favorite chapters of the entire game, as it's two Lin Kuei chapters back to back, being focused around Bihan's Lin Kuei and really tapping into that family dynamic between the trio. How there's very clearly tension simmering just beneath the surface. They seem to be the world's worst assassins, as they are near instantly caught once they enter the stronghold. But it's a fighting game, so it kind of has to happen. I do like that we had an entire chapter simply dedicated to that of Bihan, as it sets up the prestige to his name and title. We've always known Bihan to be an extremely capable fighter, especially under the Sub-Zero mantle, but we don't know how much by until he goes one-on-one with Ermac, arguably reaching the same accolades that he had achieved back in Mythologies. So again, really well done on that part. This then leads to the defeat of Quan and Shang before they are then captured, leading to the reveal of the army and the crown, as well as the expected betrayal of Bihan. And it's just done so incredibly well. Like, yes, you can definitely see it coming from a mile away, especially if you're familiar with the source material, but it's about the execution that makes it so good here. As you see his biggest supporter in Kuai Liang go absolutely insane, learning that it was his brother that was responsible for killing their father. It is the pure raw emotion and rage of Kuai Liang that just adds so much to this betrayal. So I really like what they've done here. Also, very big fan that he was the one responsible for maiming Havoc. We then of course get the battle between the two brothers. And this entire sequence is insanely good. We get to see that hate erupt to the surface, and how Bi-Han is so power hungry that he's trying to lure his brother in and offering him to basically take his hand or to die. It's just so goddamn good, and kicking Bi-Han's ass was so deserved. I cannot praise these two chapters nearly enough. As whilst I find the Scorpion and Sub-Zero feud to be a timeless one, I like this interpretation of it. So I do think it has been really well done. But sadly, around here is where the story starts to take a bit of a turn. As the second it's revealed that there is a second timeline, I more or less instantly knew what was going on. In a way, I was really hoping they would deter from this path, but of course, it is fully committed to later on. Even despite that, the story still moves forward very strong, with the following chapter being Li Mei, allowing us to actually see how this Outworld civil war unravels. And for Li Mei's character, I really do feel like this does a lot for her, as historically, she has been a character that has been overlooked. It was genuinely so nice to see her redeem herself in the eyes of the Umgadi and create peace with the royal line after losing their support for so long. This depiction of the character is very well done, and whilst she doesn't do anything very bombastically big in this chapter, I think we needed to have this chapter to create a very personal story that would help reintroduce her to the main canon. Because even when you meet her early on, you still feel the regret seeping from wounds that never healed. It's a great watch and kinda cathartic to watch those wounds be mended and fix the damage that was out of her control. So this is a great chapter for Li Mei. Moving on, our next chapter is solely based around Sindel. And yet again, it's another solid chapter. If I'm honest, I definitely think that they made this chapter so that they could in turn maybe repair a bit of the damage that evil Sindel had caused in Aftermath, as I know that was quite a controversial time for this character. This felt like definitely more of a love letter to the legacy fans of this character, and I actually think that this interpretation of Sindel is quite unique in that sense, as it blends the motherly love from the original canon with the ferocity and tenacity we saw from 11 into this really well-rounded empress who's very kind but very firm in her role. And we do feel a little bit of that quite early on when she learns of Liu's identity, maybe seeing him as a threat. I will say though that this chapter isn't perfect. The inclusion of Shinnok's amulet felt like a bit of a throwaway moment, and this is where I would say the nostalgia factor starts to bleed into the story, as it didn't really add anything to that of the overall chapter. And also, Shao, he loses a lot here. I definitely feel like he's a bit of a victim of how the narrative needs to go, but he gets his ass beat quite a lot. Now, I will say that I am glad this does happen, at least whilst he's under the title of General, because he may not be at the level of his Khan counterpart, which means that there is indeed room to grow for this character. So fingers crossed that does get tapped into. Now here is where the story most definitely takes a bit of a turn, and is what I would say is where my fears of where the story could go is confirmed. Even with that said, there still are some fantastic moments leading up into it, because for the very first time in the series, Mileena actually gets her own chapter here, and from a family dynamic standpoint, it does so much for them. We get the return of Jared, and seeing him be reunited with his family after decades of never having met him is something I never thought I needed, but I loved every second of it. It goes back to what I said earlier of the human feel-good moments this story has. This is without a doubt one of them. Mind you, on paper, Mileena should never be able to defeat someone as strong as Ermac. But I'm easily able to overlook it for what it does for the character, as well as the rest of the family. Besides, if you want to kind of write it in, you can definitely tell that Sento did a lot more damage than simply just stab Ermac. That's definitely a bit of a theory on my end, but at least it could make sense here. Back to that of the main plot, and well, my theory proved to be correct. The Chronica-esque being was indeed a Damashi disguise, but instead of that of the Dragon King, it is Titan Shang Tsung from the Aftermath timeline. Now, I will say that this is 100% in Shang's character. He's a bit of a petty bitch, and it's exactly what I had theorized. However, is this the direction I wanted the story to go? And I gotta say, no, not at all. Because so much of the storytelling up until that point feels so grounded and personal that this very sudden and quick change just kind of rubs me the wrong way. Especially with how Quan Chi and Shang Tsung have been amassing this unstoppable army with this crown that's rolled up like a bit of paper. I kind of feel bad for Shang and Quan for putting in this much effort. Thus, we are now in the multiverse segment. And in some ways, this does feel kind of forced to wrap up both endings to conclude the story of Aftermath. But instead of finishing this game's main story, it is instead interjected by something else that doesn't really add to the narrative, but if anything, kind of feels like it takes away from the rest of the characters, as a majority of the cast here will later be sidelined. Now, it's not all bad going forward. If anything, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I am kind of glad that the lingered plot thread is wrapped up. I just didn't want it to be here in this story. Like, don't get me wrong, I think it's great to see Richard Epcar back as Raiden, but I don't think it's enough to overlook the oncoming issue. Because for every one thing I like, I do also find something I have a problem with. And that's largely because going forth, it does get extremely fan-servicey. For example, we have the inclusion of Evil Sindel, and I've really grown to detest this version of the character. And of course, because we have her here, she's gotta have an MK9 moment, where she beats everyone up for reasons unexplained. But I do like the fact that Sindel wishes to fight her darker counterpart. Yes, she loses, but it also allows Mileena to rise and earn her birthright. That scene is great, proving that she is a worthy successor to her mother. It's very bittersweet in a way, as Sindel does die, but it's nice to see her be reunited with Jared in death. As Titan Shang begins his plans, there is a line here that I do want to reference later that makes it very evident that even Titans in this new era are extremely rare to come across, which is also why I have quite a big problem with the last chapter. Now, I haven't touched on him yet, but I will say I really like the utilization of Geras here. Despite the first interaction being very hostile, it looks like Liu and Geras are kind of bros now. And in this timeline, Geras hasn't just grown to respect Liu Kang, but also care for him, taking his Titan power and infusing it with Liu's most precious gift, a jade statue from the great Kung Lao. So again, whilst very small and very minor, it's a really nice moment between the two. Now this chapter is what I would label as the doppelganger chapter, as we get to play as Shang and battle the evil counterparts of the opposing timeline. And the dynamic he has that plays off the goody two-shoes of Raiden is a lot of fun here. I really do like that, as there's even fun sly jabs at each other. But never at any point do we ever not think him to be a villain, as we get to see him cut loose here, and whilst he may be put in the protagonist's shoes, he still retains that villainous flair. So that stuff really great. In many ways, this is a bit of a weird chapter to exist, because without the time travel multiverse element of it, I don't think a chapter like this would take shape. So I definitely suppose there are some benefits to it in that way. Finally, we're on to Liu Kang's chapter, and if it was up to me, I would have personally wanted this to be the very last chapter of the game, as it feels very conclusive for how it could wrap up the story. The chapter in itself is largely based around the multiverse, and the endless infinite of possibilities that comes from what is and what can be. And I will say, for the most part, they do pull it off really well. The idea of Lau being the hero of his own era is a great prospect and something the character has long deserved. Again, it's great to see Richard Epcar back. But for me, one of the best moments of the entire game is reuniting the Liu Kang and Kitana of their timelines, having the two officially kiss, because this is something we never ever see in game. It's been around since the very start of the series, so seeing them do this feels kind of taboo. Although, I must say, it is very bittersweet. It does nicely play off the whole Romeo-Juliet aspect of their relationship. So I am indeed glad this moment had happened. And in my mind, should the chapter have ended with Shang's defeat, Liu Kang saying goodbye to his friends for the last and final time, and maybe holding on to Kitana before they disappeared to their respective timelines, that would have been the perfect ideal ending. But instead, we get something a bit more bombastic. I will still say that this chapter is very good. I just would have wanted to have been slightly adjusted and tweaked, because the battle between Liu's side and Shang's side is for the most part very fun, and at no point in time will the stakes ever feel like they go down. It reaches that peak and holds it all the way throughout. So whilst I don't entirely agree with how this chapter ending, I still think it's incredibly good. So this now finally takes us to the last chapter of the game. And this might be the coolest, dumbest, but unnecessarily stupid fun fanfiction ruled fever dream that ever was. And I will say, it is very fitting that a battle like this would take place at the Pyramid of Argus. Again, well played, NetherRealm. I think that this chapter is probably gonna be the most divisive amongst fans, because there's a lot of fun in this segment, but tonally, it feels very different from the rest of the game. There's no denying the personalization of having a choose your character moment is extremely cool, but sadly, I was under the assumption that the version of the character I played and chose would be from the timeline I was from. Thus, seeing as it was Liu Kang leading the charge, I had hoped to have played my favorite version of the character. Instead, I just ended up getting a variant of him that I didn't really have much attachment to. I will say though, it's pretty dumb fun fighting the weird, twisted, concocted versions of characters. You got nightmare fuel like this, but it is fun. Like, there's things to enjoy in this segment, but tonally, it just doesn't really jive with what the previous chapters had set up. Thus, there's this conflict of ideas and interest in how the story tries to retroactively wrap up. Now, I think the biggest problem that I do actually have here is how every timeline version and every variant we do see is supposedly a titan. So by taking this divine title and kind of giving it to everyone, it just waters down the meaning behind it. Titans don't quite feel as special anymore. Eventually, we do get the duo fights of Titan Shang and Titan Quan, but I don't know how to feel about it, as whilst it does have a very strong build-up, as bosses, they don't have anything outlandish, or something that equivalates to that of a final boss status, especially seeing as they are titans here. So the final fight is a bit lackluster, but I also really like how the story wraps up. Just having everyone sit at a table and talk as people is really some of the best parts of this story, where the characters can just be that. So whilst I was a bit sour that the cast was pushed aside, it is very nice here that we could see them all come back together and have their final moments just as they say goodbye. My final thoughts for the stinger is generally pretty positive on my end. If anything, it's one of the only reasons why I kind of can gloss and overlook the multiversal aspect, as setting up Titan Havoc as a villain is a very interesting idea that could spell a very interesting future, but I'm also extremely biased with this pick, so I am very pleased of his inclusion here. I just wished it had been under different circumstances. So yes, that's been my overall thoughts on Mortal Kombat 1 story mode, from chapter to chapter and segment by segment. And like, there's a lot to take away from this review. A lot of it I loved, and a lot of it I didn't love as much. But as you can see, so much of the story is so strong for so long, before it then deviates away to try to become something more. But the melodrama and character relationships is where the game really does shine at its brightest. So I do hope that this is something they take away from the story here. Sometimes less is definitely more. I must admit, I didn't overtly hate the time travel multiverse stuff as much as I thought I would, as it does bring in some great moments. But it can't be denied that it kind of clashes with how the story sets itself up. If it had retained a more cohesive, grounded narrative, I definitely think the payoff could have been greater. Because up until the discussed double timeline thing, this game didn't just have its grip on me, but its goddamn claws in me. The idea of something existing outside of Liu Kang's gaze set up such a promising mystery, but sadly fell flat by the end of it. So I think by not playing it safe with, let's say, Onaga, or maybe even one of the many different titans that was featured in 11, may have caused them to involuntarily overstep a bit too far. Even so, there's still a lot to take away from the story, but I think you can most certainly enjoy. It's definitely worth your time and value, as some character writing is so well executed, and the payoff for long-lasting arcs, or feel-good moments, are incredibly well done. In saying that, I think they did well with a large majority of characters here, especially with giving some chapters that did not have them previously. So whilst Mortal Kombat 1's story doesn't quite stick the landing, it still does a tremendous job with 30 years of lore and canon very, very well. It's a very ambitious undertaking, so I was pleasantly surprised for the most part that it did exceed my expectations. I just hope that going forward, they keep things relatively simple and have it so things can tonally match up with the rest of the story and its previous chapters. If I was to give this a general overall score, at least from a storytelling perspective, it's a very solid and strong 8 out of 10, as it does so much so well for so long, but falters in its later steps. Had it not diverged into the multiverse aspect of the tale, and maybe juggled a few of the other characters a little bit better, this would easily be a 10 out of 10 for me. But there are some faults in the armor, not that it's necessarily a bad thing. If NetherRealm have made one thing very clear about 1, is that they're listening to community feedback to create something that fans want here, from both a storytelling and a gameplay standpoint. So I strongly commend them for doing what they have with this story, as I'm actually quite eager to dive back into it and play through it once more, knowing what I do. As for what comes next narratively, who's to say? But I'm pretty sure that after credit sequence is going to lead to something much more, and probably an expansion. Because if we got off the map, then we know we're definitely gonna get something here. But yeah, the future of Mortal Kombat is looking really good. So with that said, what did you think of Mortal Kombat 1's story? What did you like? What didn't you like? Who was your favorite character? And of course, what was your favorite moment? Please do comments down below, as I'd love to hear what you have to say. And hey, if you made it this far into the video, please do give it a thumbs up, as editing this will no doubt be an absolute nightmare. So if you did that, I would super appreciate it. But for now guys, as always, stay strong, stay well, and keep on fighting. Mortal Kombat 1 is finally here. Take care everyone, I'll catch you all soon.